Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Staff webinar series. Today's webinar is Anti-Harassment Training for Non-California Employers with Alpha Staff's HR Account Manager, Tony Solana. Before we begin, I'd like to address a brief technical overview. As you may have noticed, all attendee phone lines are muted and will remain so throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please send them via the chat feature or the Q&A feature within Zoom. We'll be addressing questions at the end of the presentation. Attendance in today's live webinar is approved for 1 CE credit with both HRCI and SHRM. At the end of the presentation, I'll share the contact information needed to request your credit. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Tony Solana, HR Account Manager. Tony has over 25 years experience as a human resources professional with over 18 years experience in the PEO industry. In addition to PEO, Tony has held HR roles in both education and nonprofit organizations. Tony, it's an absolute pleasure to host this webinar with you today. And now I turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy that you guys are joining us today for this presentation. So we're going to be talking today about harassment, bullying, and sexual harassment. This is something that I'm sure that many of you have attended before, and if you haven't, well, you learn something new. If anything, it should be as a refresher course. So basically, the goal for today is to learn the importance of harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace and how to not to do it, but actually learn how to address it and make sure that your employees are aware that the company has strict policies regarding harassment in the workplace and that harassment and retaliation will not be tolerated. Let's go to the next screen. So for the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about definitions and examples of harassment and discrimination, prevention and reporting, promoting the environment, how to maintain compliance, and managers' responsibilities. Obviously, as members of management, we all have very specific responsibilities to ensure that company policies are adhered to with every employee, right? So let's go to the next. And so these are just as general information. These are states that actually require and recommend sexual harassment and harassment training for employees on a yearly basis. So recommended but not required, are listed above. Required for state and executive branch agencies employees. Again, that's a list. Require for all employees, that is actually a requirement in California and other states. In California, you have to have 5 or more employees, and that's actually a requirement. So let's go to the next slide. So some of the non-discrimination laws that affects us all are Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, Age Discrimination Act, which protects anyone over the age of 40, Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and Americans with Disabilities Act. And we'll talk a little bit about those throughout the presentation. Next. So what are some of the protected classes under Title VII? Well, as you know, it includes race, color, citizenship, national origin, religion, gender, marital status, sexual orientation, age, disability, or any other characteristic protected by law. Next. Okay, so basically, what is discrimination? Basically, is treatment or consideration based on class versus individual merit. It's actually showing partiality or prejudice towards another person. So the actual definition is any act or failure to act impermissibly based on in whole or in part on a person's protected class that adversely affects privileges, benefits, or other work conditions and results in disparate treatment or has a disparate impact on employees or applicants. And harassment, of course, is a form of discrimination. Next. So harassment and discrimination, how does it make people feel in general? In general, victims of harassment often suffer emotional and psychological harm, as you can imagine, including stress, depression, anxiety, high blood pressure, all which affect an employee's health, which can affect productivity. So it's something that that really has a high impact on somebody's health and physically and mentally. It can be a loss of pride, decreased self-confidence, feelings of insecurity, or it can turn into a fight or flight syndrome, which means that the employee may stay at work and fight about the harassment, file a complaint, or it could be a flight, which means that the employee cannot take it anymore and is so frustrated that they leave the company. So again, as managers, we are all responsible to make sure that we maintain a positive environment at work. It's part of the culture of each company, and employees need to understand, and you guys as managers need to make sure that employees know at all times that harassment, discrimination, bullying, sexual harassment will not be tolerated. There's zero tolerance for that in the workplace. Next. So discrimination and harassment. Generally, why do employees hesitate to report discrimination, workplace harassment and sexual harassment? This happens a lot. A lot of employees don't report it. And there's, some reasons why they don't. First of all, is fear of losing their job. They're scared that if they complain, the company will fire them. Well, that could bring us to the second bullet point, fear of retaliation. That is very, I can see how some employees can feel that way, but however, retaliation is against the law. And as an employer, it's important that the company does not retaliate against an employee for bringing up harassment complaint, sexual harassment, discrimination. Obviously, an investigation should be conducted, but retaliating against that employee by firing them, putting them on suspension, or anything like that is a form of retaliation, and that is against the law. It could be fear of disrupting the workplace, fear of being accused of having no sense of humor, fear of being embarrassed, fear of feeling like less of a man or a woman. I think that's particularly more so in the event of like sexual harassment. Fear of not being believed. Discrimination and harassment are generally subtle and inconspicuous. So next. Okay, so harassment is any unwanted behavior, physical or verbal, or even suggestive, that makes a reasonable person feel uncomfortable, humiliated, or mentally distressed. So these are some examples of verbal or physical conducts that interfere with work performance, and generally it does. It has to be severe or pervasive. It has to be based on a protected class. Can occur between individuals. It actually can occur between employees, supervisors, and employees. It could be. It could occur within outside non-company employees, like maybe perhaps UPS delivery guy, FedEx, a vendor, a client, a customer. So the law also protects interns and non-employees in the workplace. And by non-employees, I just gave you a couple of examples. It could be, anybody that you do business with. Next. So why do people harass others? I would say the very first reason is control or power. It could be jealousy, and throughout my years of dealing with harassment and discrimination in the workplace and conducting investigations, I think I've found, me personally, that these two, jealousy and control and power, are usually the root cause. It could be fear of the person or group that they represent, having beliefs of a negative stereotype, It could be learned behavior. Maybe this is the way that the employee was brought up, and and for them, it's normal. Having a bad experience with a person or of that race or national origin in the past and expecting the same to occur. Next. So who can commit harassment? I kind of mentioned this already. It could be co-workers, managers, supervisors, independent contractors, vendors, customers, clients. And in the event that you personally or any of your employees complain to you that they have been harassed by an IC or a vendor, customer, client, this is something that needs to be addressed immediately with the assistance and guidance from your HR department. So never ever disregard a complaint, no matter how minor it is. It should be documented, addressed, and the solution should be, you should come up with a solution to address that issue and make sure that doesn't happen again. Next, where can harassment occur? Well, it can happen anywhere. It can happen at work. It can happen during conferences, in the conference room. It could happen in a conference outside of work, maybe a whole day seminar, office parties, picnics, outside or during non-working hours. It could be happy hour, right? You might ask, why happy hour? What if it's outside of work? Do we have to be concerned about this? Generally, because anything that happens during these events that we just spoke about, when that event is over and Monday comes along and the employees get back to work, whatever happened will be trickled into the work environment, and that will cause an environment that is not pleasant, and it could turn into something very serious. So employees need to understand, and this is part of your responsibilities as members of management, to let employees know that the company does not tolerate these kind of behaviors, even if it's off duty during work, happy hour, or any kind of event. So in essence, anyone who comes into contact with your company, it's including during these parties, is also can commit to harassment. So anything that comes up as a member of management, you yourself need to address it, always with guidance and support from your HR department. So harassing conduct could include abusive words or phrases, negative stereotyping. It can include threatening, intimidating, or hostile acts. Jokes that demean a protected class, and we talked about those at the beginning of the presentation. Written or graphic material that shows hostility or dislike to an individual or group, and that could be by posting something in the, let's say, in the break room, or sending emails to other employees with material that could be offensive to the recipient or others. Remember that employees should attend a harassment training on a yearly basis, and you as a part of management, as leaders, need to make sure that employees understand this during the course of the year. It could be maybe when you meet with them during departmental meetings, quarterly or semi-annually, whatever it might be. You might want to take a few minutes to remind employees about harassment and discrimination in the workplace. Next. So types of harassment, there's verbal, nonverbal, physical, and sexual. And we'll talk a little bit about those. Next. So examples of verbal harassment, making sexual comments about a person's body. It could be referring to an adult female as a girl, doll, baby, sweetie, or honey. Also keep in mind that the same applies to men. Calling men, a doll, a baby, a sweetie, or honey is also inappropriate, and it could be very offensive to that person. And even if it may not be offensive to that particular person you are referring to as a baby or sweetie or honey, it could be offensive to another person that is nearby that is hearing this. So always keep that in mind, that it's not just even though the recipient is okay, you're running the risk of upsetting someone that is listening to these words, or the names that you're using towards another employee, or the actions or the behavior. They can feel offended by that, and that is a problem. So be careful with that. Next, examples of nonverbal harassment are staring at someone. And usually that will be for a long period of time. That certainly makes somebody uncomfortable. Following the person around, blocking a person's path, displaying sexually suggestive visuals. We talked a little bit about that. Making facial expressions such as winking, throwing kisses, making sexual gestures through body movements. So these are all perfect examples of nonverbal harassment. Next. Okay, so examples of physical harassment. It could be hanging on or clinging to a person. It could be hugging, kissing, patting, or stroking. In certain cultures, and I'm going to speak just for Florida, especially like in South Florida, where it's a melting pot, so many different cultures, kissing and hugging is very common, right? For certain groups. And it occurs at work because of friendship, and the person may be okay with a hug or a kiss. However, keep in mind that, again, another person seeing this, it can make them feel uncomfortable, particularly if, let's say you're the manager of accounting, and you have 20 people in your department, and you come in every morning and you hug and kiss like just 2 of those employees and not the rest. Well, you're basically going to be sending out a message to the rest of your team that maybe perhaps, even though it may not be true, that those 2 employees are your favorite, right? And as a leader, you definitely cannot, you don't have the, what's the word I'm looking for? You really should not give the impression to somebody that maybe these are your 2 favorite, even though they may not be. Because at that point, you as a leader will start losing credibility, right? So be careful with that. Giving a massage around the neck or shoulders, that should not occur in the workplace. And that happens, I see that happen in every work environment. Somebody says, oh, my neck is hurting, and you're talking to them, standing by them, and you automatically start rubbing their neck and shoulders. Well, first of all, again, not appropriate. And second of all, you have to keep in mind that perhaps by doing that, you may make things worse for that person, and then the problem becomes something much bigger. Touching a person's clothing or hair or body, you can compliment somebody's hair, you can compliment somebody's clothing, nothing wrong with that as long as it's genuine. However, you can actually do those things without having to touch somebody's hair and without touching somebody's clothing. By doing so, you're actually invading their personal space, right? So I suggest that you can be genuine and say, oh, I love your hairstyle, very nice, I like your hair color, I love that blouse, I love that shirt, I love your shoes. But there is really no legitimate reason to be touching that person to give them a compliment. So again, another example is, for example, an employee, and I'm saying this because this has happened, an employee flicking another employee behind the ear each morning as he says good morning to employees. That's actually a form of physical harassment, right? So anyways, let's go to the next slide. So what is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment is a form of gender-based discrimination. It only has to occur once for it to be considered illegal. Now, the difference between that statement that I just made and non-sexual harassment is that in order for harassment to be illegal, it has to be pervasive and ongoing, right? With sexual harassment, it only has to occur once for it to be considered illegal. And it basically involves unwelcome sexual conduct that is used as the basis of hiring or other employment decisions, such as promotions, it could be raises, job assignments, etc. Also, sexual harassment, it creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment, which is definitely a no-no, right? Um, the harasser could be a supervisor, it could be a coworker, and maybe even someone who's not an employee. Again, if in the event that it comes to your knowledge that something has occurred and the employee comes up to you and says, this occurred, however, I don't want to make a big deal, I just want to let you know, keep in mind that the moment you have knowledge of an issue, you need to take action, no matter how simple it may be, even though the employee says, I don't want this to be a formal situation, it doesn't really matter. You have knowledge of it, so you have to make sure that you notify HR, and in collaboration with HR, an investigation will be conducted, and then you take it from there. But ignoring it is not an option for a member of management. I hope that makes sense. Next, so quid pro quo, that actually means, that's Latin for this, for that. And this occurs under sexual harassment. So basically, it's usually within the context of a supervisor employee. Basically, a supervisor who has power over that employee. It can be promised opportunities. For example, I'll give you a raise, or I'll give you less hours, or you can take extra days off if you go on a date with me, or whatever. Or retaliating against a person for, like, for example, for if the person refuses, retaliating. Again, remember, it's illegal, and that could be a huge problem for the company. So this is something that I personally don't see as much as I used to, and I'm very happy for that. I don't know the exact statistics. It's something that I really need to look up. But 25, 30 years ago, I remember that this was something more prevalent. Again, me personally, I don't see it as often anymore. Next. So hostile work environment. It could actually be considered a hostile work environment if comments are based upon, like I told you guys earlier, upon race, color, national origin, age, disability, or sex of the employee, or that of the employee's relatives, friends, or associations. The most common form is repeated actions, comments, or objects that unreasonably interfere with work performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Now that I said those words right there, hostile, offensive work environment, I want to make sure that I say this because I think it's important. I've also personally noticed during investigations that employees nowadays tend to use the word hostile work environment very casually. They just throw it out there, not really knowing what that actually means, what the definition of that is. And by doing so, using those words, hostile and offensive work environment, people around them, other coworkers may hear them talking about this to somebody else, and then that's where gossip and rumors begin. And as you know, gossip and rumors can be very damaging to a person personally and to the company itself. So, I recommend that you talk to your employees and let them know when you have your talks about harassment and sexual harassment, that you let them know that, before they use those words casually, to make sure they understand the meaning of it. And if it's something that is actually occurring to them, they should actually be going straight to the manager and to the human resources department. It could include also, the hostile environment could actually include inappropriate emails, sending emails to employees about, things that are certainly not professional and inappropriate, or offensive to others, which could be related to religion or politics or anything else. Next. How do I know if a hostile environment exists? So basically, it depends on how frequent the conduct is, and I talked a little bit about that earlier. How severe it is, it has to be pervasive. Is the conduct physically threatening or humiliating? Does the conduct unreasonably interfere with an individual's work performance? So these are the four basic reasons, well, not reasons, but things that will tell you, will give you a hint that a hostile work environment exists in the workplace. And again, obviously, as managers, again, you see it, you hear it, you need to address it immediately. Next. So when it is not harassment, so genuine compliments are certainly not harassments. Consensual relationships are not a form of harassment, although it could turn into sexual harassment if that consensual relationship turns sour, and then it becomes a problem, and the two employees are not getting along, and then they're claiming sexual harassment, right? So, but in general, a consensual relationship is not a form of harassment. Now, it is also not harassment, for example, when your boss talks to you in a loud voice or in an impolite way. It's not harassment as long as she is treating all other employees in a like manner. So what this is saying is that if that particular boss talks loud and yells to all the employees, technically, that is not harassment. Now, it will become harassment, maybe even discriminatory, if that particular boss is only being loud and rude and inappropriate towards one particular employee of a particular group, right? But as long as he's doing it the same for everybody, it is not harassment. So you can look at this boss as an equal opportunity bully, maybe, perhaps. So let's go to the next. Okay. So reasonable person rule. This is something that judges, juries, attorneys use on a regular basis. So basically, if a case ever made it to court, the court would apply the reasonable person standards test, asking what would a reasonable person think is out of bounds or interferes with work. Basically, the harassment must be actually offensive and objectively offensive to a reasonable person. So I think we have all maybe worked in the past with companies where there might be one or two people who, no matter what, they are offended by everything. You know, everything becomes a problem. Nothing makes them happy. And so in cases like that, or in any case, really, in any case of harassment, discrimination, the reasonable person rule test will apply. And any judge, jury, and attorney will apply this. Next. So which matters the most, your intentions or another person's perceptions in regards to, you know, maybe something that was said or done. So what do you think matters the most? So basically, next. So basically, it is the victim's perception that matters, not the intent of the person displaying the behavior. Intent is never, ever going to be a defense. You can say, oh, I didn't mean to, you know what, I wasn't thinking. And you know what, and I'm sure that the person will feel genuine by saying that, you know, okay, we believe you. However, at this point, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that it had a huge impact on that particular employee, and that's what we have to deal with. So apologizing is great, but it may not be the only way to solve the situation. Next. So let's see. Retaliation. So again, I mentioned this, retaliation against a person reporting discrimination or harassment is illegal. And complaints of retaliation are the most frequently filed charges with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So, you know, again, never ever retaliate against an employee. And, you know, this is something that I think I should also make clear, that retaliation is not necessarily just an employer retaliating against an employee. Retaliation can occur between one employee and another, okay? Next. Preventing harassment. So always think about how your actions may impact others. This is really important. So basically, think before you speak. Be careful with humor in the workplace, especially as a member of management and as leaders. Um, don't let peer pressure influence you to behave in ways you wouldn't normally do. Um, Peer pressure happens a lot, but remember, we're all adults, and we're not in high school anymore. And we have to make sure that, again, as a member of management and as a leader, that you don't participate in things like this. Be careful with forwarding inappropriate emails and inappropriate use of internet, and make sure your employees are aware of that as well. Next. So are these behaviors inappropriate? A supervisor asks a subordinate on a date. That is certainly inappropriate. It's unprofessional, and it could lead to perhaps maybe sexual harassment. A supervisor invites a subordinate of the opposite gender to go to lunch. There's nothing wrong with this at all. Maybe perhaps the supervisor is inviting that employee to celebrate their anniversary, or perhaps to discuss the employee's performance evaluation, or anything like that. So that particular scenario, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's inappropriate. In this case, I would say no. Two employees at the same level in the company become involved in a romantic relationship. Not at all. That's not a problem, as long as those two employees are not in the same department, right? Or reporting to each other. That's definitely not should not be happening. And of course, it would not become inappropriate or harassment until perhaps that romantic relationship ends, and then it becomes a problem between the two employees. It could lead to harassment. A male supervisor regularly praises the work of a highly competent female. Nothing wrong with that. Just that supervisor saying, "Hey, Jane, you did a great job. I appreciate it. Good job. Kudos." Nothing wrong with that. A female worker is subject to lengthy stares by her male coworkers because of her dress. That is certainly inappropriate, and that is also a form of harassment. So business trips with a male supervisor are included as an employment condition for a female applicant. Well, just by reading this, I would say, no, there's nothing wrong with this. It could be, think about it this way, it could be a member, two salespeople from the sales department, and they both have to travel, they go on a business trip to a seminar, and they're both traveling together. Nothing wrong with that at all. Now, as long as the company doesn't put them up in the same hotel room, that is a different story. But just traveling together for business purposes, there's nothing wrong with it. And that actually could be a part of the condition of employment, because, again, companies hire male and female, so it doesn't really matter. Next, these form of harassment. So Bob asked Becky to go out with him, and she said she's not interested. This is not harassment, only because Bob asked, Becky said no. So end of story, right? Now, this will become harassment if Bob continues to ask Becky out, even though Becky has made it very clear that she's not interested. So in that case, then it definitely is a form of harassment, because it's what? It's pervasive, it's ongoing. Nicole has photographs of shirtless firemen on her screensaver. Certainly it's inappropriate, and certainly it can be a form of harassment. Obviously, she doesn't mind seeing that on her screensaver, but anybody else that's walking around, or co-workers or managers, could find that offensive, right? Which can turn into harassment. Tom overheard Dennis telling his co-workers that Laura, that she's one hot mama. He's saying that. And he thinks he saw Laura cringe when Dennis licked his lips. That's definitely a form of harassment, definitely. Jane continues to ask Betty to go out with her, though she has clearly told her that she is not interested, and asked her to stop asking. Definitely a form of harassment. Next. These form of harassment. So let's see the first one. While Rosa was rushing to the copier to meet a deadline, Steve blocked her. Rosa tried several times to sidestep around him, but Steve continued to block her. When she asked him to please move out of the way, Steve only moved closer to her and after putting his hands on her shoulders said, "I know you don't mean that." That is definitely harassment, and that is definitely a form of sexual harassment. It can be. So this is a definite no-no, right? Jenny is one of the three people in her department being considered for the director position. Janie's VP asked her to dinner and mentions he wants to unwind before deciding who to promote. Something here is questionable, right? I mean, it's okay. She's one of the three people being considered for director, but Jenny's VP asking her to go to dinner just so that he can unwind and relax before making a decision. That gives the impression to the employee that maybe she may be the candidate, if she complies with the dinner and goes out with the supervisor, right? And that's definitely a no-no. That's, that should not be occurring. So that's definitely a form of harassment. So establishing respect. Always let people know your boundaries, your personal boundaries. It's okay to say them, as long as you say it in a professional and in a nice way. At the end of the day, you remember it's all about the delivery, right? If you are like kind of like screaming and say, "These are my boundaries," you're not going to get much, I guess, reaction from that particular employee. Just be professional, kind, respectful, and say, listen, I understand that maybe perhaps you didn't mean to, but this is how it came across, and I really like it. So I would appreciate it that that you don't do this forward, especially around me. And again, communicate and be consistent with your expectations. It goes along with letting people know your boundaries. Communicate any discomfort early. Warn the offender that the behavior is unwelcome and needs to stop immediately. Seek assistance if the harassment behavior is persistent or pervasive. It is too awkward. If it's too awkward to talk to the offending person or the problem is pervasive, talk to human resources always. And I will say, not just under this sort of circumstance, but basically on any circumstances that an employee is complaining about harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment, bullying, you should always, the first thing you should do as a member of management is to go to HR, discuss it with them, and then put together a plan to address it. So we're going to talk a little bit about diversity. And let's go to the next slide, Kim. So what is workplace diversity? Well, basically, it's a collective mixture of differences, right? Differences and similarities that include individuals and organizations. And that could be, based on characteristics, values, beliefs, backgrounds, experiences, preferences, and behaviors, right? And it's something that I've been seeing more and more throughout the years, that companies nowadays are more diverse than ever, which is awesome. I love that. But because of that, employees need to understand that they need to be more patient and respectful of the differences between, it could be races and gender, whatever. So we all have to make sure that employees understand that diversity is embraced at each one of your companies, and as well as inclusion, and to understand that they may not understand all the values and beliefs and characteristics of certain groups, but perhaps it could be, you can suggest to them, hey, learn more about it. And I think I certainly do. I do that myself. I have often throughout my career researched, certain groups and races just to learn more about it. So I am informed. Next. So diversity guiding principles. So serve as a positive role model, obviously, as leaders, for change by eliminating stereotypical, derogatory, and unprofessional comments and behaviors from the workplace. Always recognize that personal biases may exist, but do not allow them to affect working relationships or business decisions. Next. So workplace bullying definition. So And I'm going to read this. Bullying in the workplace, as defined by the Workplace Bullying and Trauma Institute. And I've said this before in one of the other presentations that I've done about this topic. I actually didn't even know that there was such a institute, but there it is. So according to them, it's the repeated mistreatment of one or more employees with a malicious mix of humiliation, intimidation, and sabotage of performance. According to the Institute, it's actually more common than sexual or verbal abuse. Bullying, according to the definition, is it's a deliberate, hurtful, repeated mistreatment of employees driven by a desire to control. And that's actually bolded because it's very true. Bullies in general, it's all about control, right? They need to be in control. And this is in the behaviors way because perhaps they see something in another person that they're lacking in, and they react to that by bullying that person. Again, it's about insecurities and control. Bullying behavior may exist at any level of an organization. Bullies can often are managers and supervisors as well as co-workers. And bullying is considered a psychological violence. In general, it's bad in itself, but especially if it falls under a protected class, all right? So let's go to the next. To continue, so workplace bullying can be considered as negative acts directed towards employees. This includes intimidation, intimidating or undermining employees by demeaning their work standards, not giving them credit, setting them up for failure, and constantly reminding them of all mistakes. Threatening employees' personal self-esteem and work status, isolating employees from opportunities, information, and interaction with others. I have seen that happen in some of the bullying investigations that I have conducted in the past. Also, bullies can also bully somebody because maybe that particular employee has received praise from management about work being well done, a project that they did that made a difference to the company, and that bully maybe perhaps feels again jealous and react by bullying that person. And just like harassment and discrimination, as a company, you should make sure that employees understand that bullying will not be tolerated, and that it could lead to disciplinary action, often including termination. Next. So here's some other examples of bullying and harassment. Some common forms. It could be invasion of personal space, uninvited physical contact. I guess it could be also, let's say, exclusion or social isolation, blame without factual justification, social mocking and teasing, yelling, shouting, screaming, malicious gossiping. This is very common with bullying. They create gossip, which creates rumors as well, and it could be very damaging to the company, but it could also be very damaging to that particular person. So it's important that the moment that you, as a manager or leader, sees something like this happening, that you put a stop to it immediately, right? It could include aggressive emails or notes, overt threats, and aggression or violence. Next. So effects and indicators of a bully, right? It could be diminished performance by that particular employee who is being bullied, decreased productivity, high turnover, right? Chronic agitation and anxiety, fear, bad evaluations if you fight back, feel everyone knows about the bully, but there's nothing that can be done about it. Violence, legal cost for counsel, and this is very true. Always think about it this way: anytime that someone files a claim and maybe they engage an attorney or perhaps the EEOC, this is going to cost money to the company to fight it, right? So think about that. And many times it could have been avoided by simply doing the right thing at work and addressing it and doing an investigation. and perhaps whether you have to discipline somebody for it or termination, depending on how severe the infraction is. So always think about how this is affecting that particular person, but also about the company. How is this going to affect the company financially? Which in most cases it will, right? Next. So what is not bullying or harassment? Expressing differences of opinion, that is certainly not bullying or harassment. Everybody has opinions, as long as it doesn't turn into a fight, right? As long as everybody understands that everybody has an opinion, and that's okay. There's no need to turn into an argument. Offering constructive feedback, that is certainly not bullying. Making a legitimate complaint about another worker's conduct. It's not bullying or form of harassment. You just need to, if you're complaining about it, make sure that you address it. And again, in collaboration with the HR department. Reasonable management action includes decisions about job duties and work to be performed, workloads and deadlines. Sometimes some employees say, I'm being bullied by my manager because my manager has given me unreasonable workloads and deadlines. Well, that's not necessarily true. Perhaps the workloads and the deadlines are because of extra work. Maybe there's a new account that came on board and more work needs to be done. So that is not workloads and deadlines doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's being bullied or it's a form of retaliation towards an employee. So work instructions, supervision, or feedback is not bullying. Work evaluations is not bullying. Discipline, suspensions, or terminations, certainly not bullying. Next. Managers cannot ignore, and I said this earlier, so if you witness harassment or discrimination, address with the offender as soon as possible and follow your company and report the behavior to HR always. So remember, we all react and interact through our own biases. So help offender understand your policy and how the conduct can be perceived. Again, always involving HR. And again, I'll say this, I cannot say this enough. If an employee brings it to your attention, and even though that employee is saying, hey, I don't want to make a big deal, then don't say anything. Unfortunately, you cannot do that. You have to address it. It has to be documented, addressed, and taken care of. Next. So your responsibility as a manager, you're required to report any harassment reported reported to you, or which they or which you observe, even if no one is objecting to it. Remember, you lead by example, right? Responsible for any harassment or discrimination they should have known about. Review and take steps to understand the discrimination and harassment policy in your company. This is something that everyone who's a member of management, the leadership team, should know these policies like the back of their hand, and should always have an updated employee handbook with updated policies at all times handy, that they can address it with the employee. Supervisors and managers will be subject to discipline for failing to report suspected sexual harassment and for engaging in retaliation. So failure to report, again, you will be held responsible as a member of management, and it could lead to your disciplinary action against you and even perhaps termination. Make sure employees understand the process to report harassment, that the company will not retaliate for reporting it or participating in an investigation. Always never ever ignore questionable conduct, ever. Next. Here this is actually quite a lot of bullet points. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but so again, some responsibility as a manager. Do take every complaint seriously. Do let the employee know that the company takes its EEO and workplace harassment policies very seriously. Do thank the employee for bringing the issue to your attention. Do let the employee know that you must speak with witnesses and the accused and make notes, obviously, during the investigation. Do notify HR as soon as possible. Um, and obviously, do not promise any particular outcome. Don't tell the employee, hey, I tend to agree with you, whatever. Actually, you have to be very neutral. You actually should just be taking the information that the employee is saying and address it, but never say something like, I understand how you feel, or never say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, this is wrong. I mean, you have to be very careful what you say, because you don't want to promise anything to an employee or that you agree with what they're saying, right? Until an investigation is conducted. Investigations and outcomes. This is the next slide. Again, respond to complainant. Begin interviews with assistance from HR. There's certain processes that need to be followed and steps. And they'll again to avoid discriminatory practices. All investigations should be conducted in the same way with every employee in every situation. Remain as impartial as possible. This is kind of like what I was talking about a second ago. Remember, innocent until proven guilty. Maintain confidentiality to the extent possible. In general, only employees should know that there's no way that you can 100% maintain confidentiality, because people that on a need-to-know basis will know about this. But for example, if there's an issue going on in the accounting department, that will be handled by the management, the accounting manager, maybe the controller, the VP, and with HR. Other people, other managers and leaders in other departments doesn't need to know about it. So remember, you have to maintain confidentiality at all times. Give determination, result of investigation, and what the next steps will be. And again, all these things are done with the assistance and collaboration with the HR department to ensure consistency. What can a manager do to help employees feel safe reporting discrimination? Set an example, respectful workplace behavior, especially since you're a leader. Set clear expectations. Take immediate steps to stop inappropriate behavior or conduct. Handle investigations as discreetly and confidentially as possible. Be sensitive to feelings. It is not easy for anyone. Guard against retaliation. Again, remember, retaliation is a no-no. And be sure to report it immediately. I think we kind of talked a little bit about this too in some of the other slides. Next. Again, I think I also talked about this in other slides. Yeah, let's go to the next again. Okay, so an employee reports harassment to his or her supervisor and says, I don't want you to do anything about it. Again, I think I mentioned this a couple of times during the presentation. You cannot promise just to listen and be aware. You have to take action. The employee, you have to tell the employee that this will be addressed because you have knowledge. The reason for this is because let's say that you may ignore it. The employee complained to you, you listened, you said, okay, let me know if anything else happens. Let's say that a month from now, 2 months from now, the employee comes back and says, this is, this continued to happen. This has been a problem. I'm filing a complaint. And then, let's say, for example, that HR or a member of management will say, hey, Tony, the employee told me that he told you about this, a couple of months ago. Why didn't you document this? Why didn't you let us know? Let us be aware of the situation. So by ignoring it and not taking care of it when it actually happened, it actually will become a problem later on, which could be a lot more serious and could cost a lot of money for the company. Next. So impact on the organization decreases morale, decreases productivity, impacts the reputation of the organization and the employee, and unnecessary rumors and gossip. We talked a little bit about that. So To summarize, intentionally develop a sense of cultural awareness. Do not compare. Do recognize cultural differences. Respect the person regardless of position. Learn to adjust and be patient. Um, at the end of the day, it all comes down to respecting all people and ensuring that you have a harassment-free and discrimination-free environment at your workplace. So if you see it, report it. You can always go to your manager, human resources, any member of management team, or you can report it to Alpha staff at the 888 hotline. Okay, and all this will be handled very confidentially at all times. So, any questions you guys may have? That I only have 4 minutes. I guess I spoke too much. But if you have any questions that you want to ask, please, you can do so now. Kim, let me know.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate your information in today's webinar. And again, if there are any questions, please, because your phone lines are muted, use the chat feature or the Q&A feature. We'll address as many questions as we can, but we'll end on time so that we can get everyone back to their normal day. At this point, we will, whoops, yes, Tony? Did you
say that, in the event that because of timing right now, we only have 3 minutes. If you guys, at the end of the presentation, Kim is going to show my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or call me, and I'll be happy to address any of the questions you may have.
Thank you for that. It's a lovely offer. All right, so additional support. So just as a reminder, if you would like a copy of the presentation or to request your HRCI or SHRM credit certificates, you can send an email to hrsc@alphastaff.com, or you can give us a call at 888-335-9545. And just as we wrap up, just a reminder to mark your calendar for the next webinar in this series. So in 2 weeks, on July 28th, we have Unemployment Best Practices with Alpha Staff's Pam Nading and Art Leisure from our Unemployment Department. One final note is you will receive a survey as this webinar ends, and we do really appreciate your feedback, taking a couple of minutes to answer any questions or to provide any feedback regarding the webinar. Again, we do value your feedback, and we do take all of your suggestions into consideration as we build the calendar for next year's webinar series. So far, still no questions, but I'll hold on the line for another minute or so. Thank you, Tony, for your time today. Thank you, attendees, for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you next time with Unemployment Best Practices.
Thank you, everyone.
Tony, it looks like most folks are hopping off. So I guess this is it. Thanks again, Tony. I'll see you around.